The emperor has proclaimed his ascension to the throne in a traditional ceremony held at the imperial palace. Good evening. This is NHK's News in English for Monday, November 12th. At the imperial palace, the emperor today proclaimed his ascension to the imperial throne in the presence of representatives from home and abroad. Omae no gi, meaning the ceremony before God, was held in the morning in the presence of Prime Minister Toshiki Kaifu and the heads of 3 divisions of government. In this ceremony, the emperor reports his enthronement to the imperial sanctuary. About 70 people attended this ceremony. At 9 o'clock this morning, the emperor appeared on the corridor of Kashiko Dokoro, the imperial sanctuary. The emperor bowed deeply and read out a statement signaling the start of the enthronement ceremony. The emperor then entered the Kore-den Hall, where successive emperors and other members of the imperial family are enshrined. He then advanced to a sacred hall where all the gods and goddesses are enshrined. The emperor read out the statement in both places. The enthronement ceremony was held at the State Hall of the Imperial Palace at 1 o'clock this afternoon. Banners were hoisted in the courtyard, and ceremonial attendants stood in line with swords or bows in accordance with tradition. In all, 2,500 people were present, including the heads of 3 branches of government and representatives in various fields. From overseas, there were representatives of 158 countries, plus the United Nations and the European Community. The Prince and Princess of Wales from Britain were among them. The emperor, dressed in traditional costume, was led by the Director General of the Imperial Household Agency. He was accompanied by attendants carrying the insignia of the throne and the seal of state. He was then seated on the imperial throne. Then the empress, in a traditional 12-layered costume, seated herself in the empress seat. The emperor then read out a message proclaiming his ascension to the throne in front of the prime minister, who came forward. The emperor says that he has acceded to the throne in accordance with the Japanese Constitution and the Imperial House Law. He says this is being promulgated to Japan and the world through the ceremony of ascension at the State Hall of the Imperial Palace. It is also a time to recall the achievements of his father, the late Emperor Showa, during his more than 60 years on the throne. He says that the late Showa Emperor always shared the joys and sufferings of the Japanese people. The emperor says that he will always keep this in his mind and will strive for the happiness of everyone. He says that he will honor the Constitution and do his best to be the symbol of the state and of the unity of the people, as stipulated by the Constitution. The emperor expresses the sincere hope that Japan will continue to grow and develop through the wisdom and exertions of its people, and that Japan will contribute to friendship and peace in the world and to the welfare and prosperity of all mankind. Prime Minister Toshiki Kaifu then congratulated the emperor on behalf of the Japanese people. Mr. Kaifu says that it is a great pleasure for the people that the emperor has held the ceremony of ascension to the throne at the State Hall of the Imperial Palace to promulgate his enthronement worldwide. He says that he respects the emperor even more to hear that he will learn from the example of the late Showa emperor, who shared the joys and sufferings of the Japanese people.
After the Seiden no Gi, the Emperor and Empress proceeded by motorcade from the Imperial Palace to the Akasaka Palace, where they reside. The couple left the Imperial Palace at about 3:30 this afternoon in a convertible brought from Britain specially for the occasion. 44 vehicles formed the motorcade, including cars carrying the Crown Prince, the Prime Minister and the Grand Chamberlain, as well as sidecars of the Imperial Guard. Nearly 120,000 people gathered along the 4.7-kilometre route. The motorcade arrived at the Akasaka Palace at 4 o'clock. Here are the reactions of some of those who attended today's ceremony. Prime Minister Toshiki Kaifu says the ceremony was blessed with beautiful weather and proceeded in a calm and auspicious atmosphere. Mr. Kaifu says it was the best ceremony in history, attended by representatives of 158 countries and 2 international organizations. He says that in the procession he headed, he saw large numbers of Japanese people gathering along the street, all cheering and waving to the imperial couple. He says it was a wonderful ceremony. The chairman of the Japan Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Rokuro Ishikawa, says the solemnity of the enthronement ceremony impressed him deeply. He felt that the ceremony embodied the history and traditions of the 125 generations of emperors. The famous mathematician Heisuke Hironaka says it was wonderful. It was like hearing the best music that can be found nowhere else. The president of Tohoku University, Junichi Nishizawa, says he feels as if he has seen the very essence of Japanese culture. He says it's rare to see Japanese culture in such a concentrated form. The honorary president of the National Association of Kindergartens, Sumiko Asano, says tears rolled down her cheeks when the 3 cheers of Banzai were shouted. A former professional baseball hero, Sadaharu Oh, says he was touched by the calm and solemn atmosphere when there was no sound to be heard. He says he believes the occasion helped foreign guests understand Japan. Fashion designer Hane Mori says she was impressed by the gay yet sophisticated color coordination born out of tradition, such as the white and various other colors of the Empress's 12-layered kimono. She says she felt as if she was dreaming.
The series of ceremonies held today were the first to be held under Japan's post-war constitution. The ceremonies differed somewhat from the way they were carried out in the pre-war period because of the new constitution, which stipulates the separation of state and religion. The difference was particularly noticeable in the words the emperor delivered during the enthronement ceremony in the state hall, Seiden no Gi, which was this time designated a ceremony of state, not an imperial function. In the pre-war period, the emperor's proclamation was called an imperial edict, but this time it was referred to as his words. In these words, the emperor stressed that he would honor the Constitution and do his best to be the symbol of the state and of the unity of the people. Another difference was this time the seal of the emperor and the seal of state were included among the items placed in the imperial throne canopy, or takamikura. Traditionally, only the sacred treasures, namely the sword and the koma-shaped jewel, were placed inside the canopy. Furthermore, the Japanese guests at the ceremony wore tailcoats this time, whereas in pre-war Japan they wore traditional court costumes or military uniforms. Also, the Prime Minister led the 3 cheers of banzai in pre-war Japan. He stepped down to the courtyard, but this time Prime Minister Kaifu led the 3 cheers right in front of the imperial throne. In calling for 3 cheers, he also added words to make clear that the cheers were to be specifically congratulating the emperor on his ascension. Banners displayed in the courtyard were also carefully selected. Banners carrying mythical figures were excluded this time in order to eliminate religious connotations. The ceremony stressed the fact that the emperor has indeed become a symbol of state under post-war constitution.
We now have a live report from the Imperial Palace, where a court banquet is due to begin at 7:30. This is reporter Yoshiaki Kabata reporting directly from the Imperial Palace. The banquet is going to be held at the Homeiden Hall in the Imperial Palace. Already, just after 6 o'clock, all the people, the attendants, have taken their place, and just after 7, the guests are arriving, have begun to arrive, and also the Crown Prince and other members of the imperial family are waiting to receive the guests. Very soon, the members of the imperial family and their majesties will come to the Matsukaze room in Chowa-den to receive the guests. Now, these banquets will be held 7 times altogether, including the one today, and this is a state ceremony. Today, the first banquet will be attended mostly by foreign dignitaries, 151 countries, and from the international organizations. Altogether, 350 guests are invited to the banquet. Because the number is so numerous, the French dinner course is not going to be served today. And so instead, they are serving a Japanese dinner course. However, because of the guests being from abroad, they will be serving with not only with chopsticks, but knives and forks. And so the foreign guests are going to be arriving one after another. And now here are some scenes from the various places around the country today. This is right in front of the Imperial Palace early in the morning. Policemen are patrolling the area. They are keeping the city, the entire city, under strict surveillance. Meanwhile, the freeways and roads in the city are really vacant, practically no cars. And here, the electro signboard reports that the accession ceremony is being held. This young man in Tokyo says that he is interested in the event because this is a historical event. The young woman said that she was not interested in it. This woman says that because she cannot use the locker room, it's very inconvenient. And here in Tokyo Harbor, the ships anchored have tooted the horn all at once to commemorate the event. And this is in Nagasaki, where the so-called flower train ran today. And this is in Matsue, the Taisha. A float called Danjiri was pulled along the streets for the first time in 21 years. However, there were some protest movements also being held here in Shibuya. A rally against the enthronement ceremony at Yamate Church. More than 1,000 people gathered at the call of scholars, intellectuals, and lawyers. And now people are being inspected, those people who want to line the streets to look at the parade. This woman says that she was able to see the Empress. She was so impressed by the Empress. She was looking so dignified and graceful. This man also says she was so moved, and he says that he waved to their majesties. This man says he couldn't get a sight of their majesties. This young man says that he came because this happens once every 60 years or so. And this is the press center, about 900 journalists representing 57 countries. He says that it was very impressive, very colorful, and it told a lot about history and culture of Japan. And now again, in Okinawa, a protest rally was being held. Christian and other groups held a rally, and about 100 people took part in the rally. And in Sendai, northern Japan, in Miyagi Prefecture, there was a lantern procession commemorating the enthronement. And this is back to the Imperial Palace in dusk.
Journalists from various countries sent first-hand reports of the ceremony. The BBC of Britain broadcast its Tokyo correspondent's report in a news bulletin aired this evening Japan time. The BBC correspondent commented on the Emperor's statement that he will honour the Constitution, and he underscored the fact that this enthronement was carried out in accordance with the post-war Constitution. He also reported on activities by extremists. The Associated Press of the United States reported that it was a traditional ceremony, but was conducted in a way that reflected the spirit of the new constitution. In South Korea, newspapers had earlier carried special features on the ceremony or commented in it on editorials expressing concerns over a possible return to the pre-war imperial system. But today's evening papers simply carried the facts of how the ceremony was held. China's New China News Agency and the official Soviet news agency TASS merely reported that the ceremony was held without comment.
More than 10 handmade projectiles were fired in and around the Tokyo metropolitan area today, the day of the Emperor's enthronement. A total of 29 guerrilla attacks were reported, including a fire at a railway station which halted 2 train lines for about 2 hours. Police suspect radical groups carried out the attacks to express their opposition to the enthronement. Projectiles were fired from vacant houses in 4 locations between 12:45 and 3:20 this afternoon. These locations included Tsukuda 2-chome in Chuo Ward and Okubo 2-chome in Shinjuku Ward. More than 10 projectiles were fired at the Imperial Palace. One of them landed in a locker room at the Tokyo Women's Medical College in Kawadacho in Shinjuku Ward. The projectile broke through the roof of the 5-story prefabricated building. Projectiles set off by time ignition devices caused fires in 4 places. Earlier, projectiles were fired at 5 self-defense force facilities, including a ground self-defense force camp in Higashi Tachikawa. In the morning, a fire started at Akihabara Station. The Yamanote and Keihin Toku lines were suspended for 2 hours. In addition, a smoke bomb type of explosion went off at 5 subway stations, halting traffic. A total of 29 guerrilla attacks have been reported in Tokyo, Kanagawa, Chiba, Saitama, and Ibaraki prefectures. Fires were started, for example, at shrines and construction sites in and around Tokyo. Arson is expected. In one incident, 1 woman was injured when she was evacuated from a subway station. At a meeting in Tokyo, Japan's major leftist group, the Chukaku-ha, hinted that it was responsible for the attacks. Police have begun an investigation suspecting that the attacks were carried out by radical groups to express their opposition to the enthronement. Strict security was imposed today by deploying 37,000 policemen in Tokyo. This is the highest number ever deployed. The police authorities enforced security by searching buildings and apartments within 8 kilometers of the Imperial Palace in order to prevent guerrilla attacks by, for instance, a mortar shell. There were attacks even within that area, which was kept under watch by police. Some private residences and hospitals in the Metropolitan District were hit by mortar shells. The guerrilla attacks targeted the public transport system, including subways and railways in the center of Tokyo. This was aimed at disrupting the public transport.
Foreign Minister Taro Nakayama has been holding a series of talks with foreign dignitaries. Today he met Chinese Deputy Prime Minister Wu Sheqian. Mr. Wu praised Japan's resumption of lending aid to China. He also expressed a keen interest in holding ministerial-level exchanges to normalize relations between the two countries. Mr. Nakayama told him he would study the possibility of such exchanges. Mr. Wu said he regards Japan's signing of an official statement lifting the suspension of a third yen loan to China as an active effort on Japan's part to improve the bilateral relationship. Mr. Wu then invited Mr. Nakayama to visit China to promote dialogue between the two countries. He expressed a keen interest in resuming ministerial-level exchanges, which have been suspended since the Tiananmen Square incident in June last year. Egypt's State Minister for Foreign Affairs, Boutros Ghali, said after meeting Foreign Minister Taro Nakayama that Egypt would continue to do its best to solve the Gulf crisis peacefully. Mr. Ghali said that once war broke out, it could lead to a disaster. Mr. Ghali said he would strive to achieve a peaceful solution, even though the scope to do so is limited. The Trade and Industry Minister, Kabun Muto, met the President of Brazil, Fernando Collor. The minister promised $2 billion in financial assistance to Brazil, which is burdened with huge debts. Mr. Muto said he hopes Brazil will make use of the $2 billion aid in reconstructing its economy. He also said he hopes Brazil will start considering seriously the question of making repayments to Japan.
Britain's Prince Charles, here to attend the Emperor's enthronement ceremony, visited the Setagaya Museum in Setagaya, Tokyo this afternoon, where the British Museum exhibition is being held. Meanwhile, Princess Diana visited the children hospitalized at the National Children's Hospital. The prince arrived at the museum entrance a little after 3:30. He greeted museum officials and about 500 museum visitors. The art exhibition opened from the 20th of last month in commemoration of the Japanese Gallery, which was established earlier this year in the British Museum. Prince Charles viewed the exhibition among the general public. The museum was complying with the British Embassy's wishes that there be no restrictions made on the general public.
Princess Diana visited the National Children's Hospital in Setagaya Ward in Tokyo. She entered a playroom where 10 children were waiting and asked whether she could take off her shoes. Princess Diana has 2 children and she's experienced in working with children. The princess crouched down so she could look into the children's eyes to talk with them. The princess cuddled the children and told them to get well soon.
On the second day of the Kyushu Grand Sumo tournament today, 4 Yokozuna Grand Champions and Ozeki champion Konishiki scored their second wins, but Ozeki Kirishima suffered his second loss. Here is the bout between Kirishima and... This is the bout between Kirishima and Akinoshima. Akinoshima forced out Kirishima. And now the bout between Onokuni and Tochinowaka.
大野国2日目の相撲いい当たりです栃の若右下手栃の若出る大野国寄り切り
Onokuni forced out Tochi-no-waka. Now the results of some other bouts today. Jingaku pushed out Koto-no-waka. Kasugafuji pushed Mito-izumi. Takahanada forced out Takamisugi. Kushimaumi crushed out Koto-fuji. Kyokudozan thrust down Wakahanada. Kotonishiki forced out Ozutsu. Konishiki thrust out Takatoriki. Hokutomi pushed out Hananokuni. Chiyonofuji forced out Sakahoko. Asahifuji drove out Itai.
And now the weather. It rained in Hokuriku and Hokkaido today. It was fine in other areas. It was cold this morning due to a cold air mass in many areas of the country. However, it became warmer during the day. There are clouds stretching from east to west in the northern Japan region. It's clear in eastern and western Japan, and it's expected to clear up in northern Japan later. Tomorrow's forecast. The weather in northern Japan will improve and it'll be sunny throughout Japan. Scattered clouds will appear in the afternoon from the west of the Kanto Plain, but other areas will remain sunny. Overnight lows will be 2 to 3 degrees lower than last night in Tohoku and Hokkaido, but about 3 degrees higher in other areas. Daytime highs will be higher than today everywhere. It'll be 5 to 6 degrees warmer than today in Asahikawa and Sapporo. Other areas will be 2 to 4 degrees warmer.
And that's it for NHK's News in English. Join us tomorrow evening at 7 p.m.